Let's talk about same origin and cross origin in this video. Let's imagine that we have two different web servers. One is Google server and another one is Facebook server. Google server has its own IP address and that IP address is mapped to this www.google.com domain name. And Facebook server has its own IP address and that IP address is mapped to www.facebook.com. And that will be available in the DNS. So the DNS will tell us the IP address from the domain name, right? Now, let's imagine that we have a browser and that browser is trying to access Google's homepage. So we either click the URL for Google's homepage or we type that in the browser. When we do that, the browser will try to find out the IP address of that particular domain name, right? So it doesn't have to be the home page. It could even be some sub pages. In both cases, the browser will extract the domain name from the URL and it will find the IP address of that domain name. So normally it will use the DNS to find the IP address. Once it has the IP address, then the request will be sent to the Google server with Google's IP address as a destination IP address. Now the Google server will respond back and that response will be rendered on the browser. So now the page is rendered. So this request is made for the URL that we see in the browser's address bar. In this case, it will be https www.google.com. But browser can send many requests behind the scene. It will not just be for the URL that we see in the browser's address bar. And this same origin and cross origin concepts is applicable only for those requests that are happening behind the scene. So those behind the scene requests could be either made by JavaScript which is running on this page, or it could even be form action. So we may have a form and that form will have an action URL, and when you submit that form, the request will be sent to that URL. So both of these, the requests made by JavaScript as well as the form actions, are behind the scene requests, and they can be either same origin request or cross origin request. Okay. So before understanding the difference between same origin request and cross origin request, let's first see what is an origin, right? So we have this URL and this URL is https www.google.com and it could even have some optional paths. So there are many optional paths available for an URL, right? So let's imagine that this particular URL has a path as well. Now, this URL is for Google server and Google server has a domain name. The domain name is www.google.com. Now, the origin of any web server or web resource is made up of three parts. One is scheme, then we have domain, and we have port. Okay, so we only need to include port if the port is non-standard port. If it is a standard port like 443 or 80, then we don't need to specify the port. Okay. Anything other than these three parts are not part of an origin. So the origin is combination of scheme, domain name, and the port. Okay. So in this case, if we take Google server, the origin for Google server is https, which is the scheme, and www.google.com, which is the domain name. And it also has the port 443 because it is a standard port. We are not specifying it, but the origin includes the port as well. So the origin for Google server in this case is https www.google.com with port 443. So that is the origin. And we have origin for Facebook server as well. And for the Facebook server, the origin is https www.facebook.com. And again, the port is 443. So this is the origin for Facebook server. Now, if we go back to the browser, we said that there will be many requests that will be made behind the scene, right? So now the page that we are displaying on the web browser is Google's web page. So the origin of the current page that is displayed on the browser is https www.google.com. So that is the origin of the page that is currently being displayed. If the browser makes a request and that request URL has the same origin as Google's origin, then it is same origin request. But if the URL of the request made by the browser has different origin, so for example, if the browser makes a request to facebook.com, then obviously the URL's origin will not be same as Google's origin. So those type of requests are called cross origin requests. Okay. From the browser side, we know that this is the page that is currently loaded and this is the request that we are making, and based on that we will be able to figure out whether this is a same origin request or cross origin request. But how does the server know? So if a request is coming to Facebook server, the Facebook server might not know whether that request is coming from the Facebook page itself or from some other page, in this case like Google. So the Facebook server does not know that. So in order to inform the server of the origin, each request that are made by browser will include a request header. Okay, that request header will be called origin, and that origin's value will be the origin of the page that is currently displayed on the browser. And for most parts, this origin header cannot be spoofed. So server can reliably use that to identify whether the request is coming from the same origin, i.e. the web page of the Facebook itself, or it is coming from different origin. Okay, so that is how server knows whether the request is same origin request or cross origin request. Now, we have previously seen that the origin is made up of three parts: scheme, domain, and port. If any one of these changes, then that request will not be considered a same origin request. For example, hypothetically, let's imagine that the Facebook web server's origin is https://www.facebook.com. Now, when we get the request and that request's origin is just HTTP, not HTTPS, but the remainder of the parts like domain and port names are same, in this case, this request will still be considered as cross-origin request because all three parts has to be exactly same to consider a request as same origin request. Even if the scheme is different or even if the port is different, then that request will still be considered as cross-origin request. Okay. So this is one of the very important concepts that other security features are built on top of. Okay. That is all I wanted to share in this video. I hope this is useful. Thank you.